My father did not like cats. It was a regular part of at least every week a conversation at night where my dad would tell jokes about cats and make disparaging comments. I don't know if it had anything to do with that. His sister uh, had 17 feral cats in the backyard and ate them out of house and home, but he didn't like cats. And I grew up as a dog person, knowing that for certain I would not ever own a cat. And then I met the woman that I would marry. And when it came time to tie the knot, she let me know that it was a package deal. It was her and her two cats. She had a female cat and a male cat. The female cat was called Gossip because Gossip talked like a church gossip. She talked all the time. And the other cat was Wolfie, short for Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. In their family, all of the cats, like Chopin, had musical names. And Wolfie was her familiar. He was a tiny little cat, but a long-haired cat. He was a rescue cat and had been abused by a male earlier. And so he had a hard time warming up to me. But Wolfie was Mary's favorite cat ever. She got a new church. We moved down to Dearborn, Michigan, and she got an invitation to come out to see her parents for 4 days. And she said, the cats don't know the neighborhood. Whatever you do, don't let the cats out. You see where this is going, right? So I go to the grocery store. I come back with a load of groceries. I open the front door for maybe 3 seconds and pew, Wolfie, gone. Had to be Wolfie. So I put the groceries quickly in the refrigerator and I looked all through the neighborhood and I walked that neighborhood for about 3 hours. I went later that night and I called 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 and there was no Wolfie. So I went to bed and I thought, I'm not telling my wife yet because if he comes back in the morning, all will be well. Woke up with this bad pit in my stomach and I thought, I'm going to walk down to the arterial. And sure enough, I go down there and there is his beautiful tail and this skin on his back. The only thing left is just little kind of grease skid of a cat. And I went back and I got a square point shovel and I took him and I buried him in the backyard. Don't worry, I gave him a nice Christian burial. But then I had to call my wife and said, honey, you know I love you. You know I did my best, but Wolfie got out and Wolfie's dead. And I had to bury him in the backyard. And Gossip has been sleeping on his grave ever since. She comes home and she's acting nice and sweet and forgiving, but behind her eyes you can just see, you killed my cat. I'm at work the next day. And I get a call from the office. I'm serving as a chaplain at the Children's Hospital of Michigan. And the director calls me in and says, you need to call home. This was before cell phone, so she couldn't get a hold of me directly. So I call home, and Mary says, he's alive, he's alive. And I said, who's alive? And she says, Wolfie's alive. It's like, that cat ain't alive. I buried that cat in the backyard. She goes, there. He meowed. Did you hear him? No. He meowed again. Did you hear him? No. So I go to my boss and said, I got to go home. I think my wife has slipped a gear. So I'm driving home and I'm thinking, what in the world am I going to do? I have just hitched my wagon to this woman who I plan to spend the rest of my life with, and she's crazy at this moment. Which brings us to our story. On Easter morning, the women come back from the tomb and they tell the disciples that they have seen Jesus. And if you look at Scripture, Scripture says the disciples considered it an idle tale. A tale that women would tell because they don't know any better. The men don't believe. They don't believe. And then about a week later, all the disciples save Thomas are in a room and Jesus appears to them, peace be with you. And they go to Thomas afterwards and they say, we have seen the Lord. He came with us. We've seen him. He's alive. And Thomas is like, death is death. I know you guys are having a hard time, but I tell you what, unless I see him, unless I put my finger in the hole of his hands, unless I put my hand in his side, I ain't believing. The guys I've been with for 3 years have slipped a gear. I'm not doing it. Thomas is called the twin in Scripture. And we get doubting Thomas. Thank you for bringing that up. We get doubting Thomas from the Scripture. And if you want to know who the twin is, Thomas's twin, I am the twin. I am the one that often finds myself with doubts. And unless I'm much mistaken, I'm probably not the only one. The interesting thing is Thomas can't see Jesus. And so therefore he says, I won't believe that Jesus is alive because I can't see him. The problem with vision in our eyes is that eyes are very good at establishing facts, but eyes are very bad about seeing truth. Paul talks about the eyes of our heart being enlightened, and that's what we should go for. Saint Exupéry in The Little Prince says, it is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible. When I was in 8th grade, I went to Philmont, New Mexico, and my eyes saw these hills that were 10,000 feet up to the tooth of time, and they saw that the trees would end and the rocks continued, and it was beautiful. And that's what my eyes saw. When I was a little older, I graduated from college. I went to Scotland, and I visited Boar Hills, where a Rotarian lived. And Boar Hills had a little tiny stone chapel. And this chapel had no electricity, no electric lights, had no running water, had no bathrooms. And I was like, who wants to worship here? And when I got older, I got married and we had Michael. I saw a little baby that had colic. And that when his mother and I would wrap him really tightly in his blankets, that he became calmer. Those were the things my eyes saw, but those were not the truth of those events. The truth is, in 8th grade, a young scout was hiking in those mountains, and he felt the presence of God in a way that was probably more real than the trees and the rocks and even my fellow scouts. And he received his call to ministry walking in those hills. The truth of that chapel was on a Christmas Eve, by the light of the kerosene light in that cold, cold space, I felt myself in the manger in that barn with Jesus on that first Christmas night. And mine was not the only eye that was not dry. In the flickering light and in the cold, Jesus and the Spirit of God were so present. It was like, yeah. And the truth of that little boy was that his mother and I would lay down our lives for him. There is nothing we would not do to protect him and to take care of him. Those are truths that the eyes cannot see. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. So now Thomas is back with the other disciples, and it's the following week, and suddenly Jesus shows up. And Jesus turns to Thomas and said, take your finger and put it here in my hand. Take your hand and put it in your side, in my side. Do not doubt, but believe. And in that dim light of an oil lamp, I'm sure, Thomas doesn't put his finger in the hand. He doesn't put his hand in the side. He turns to Jesus and he says, "My Lord and my God." Thomas went all the way to India. The main church in India is the Martoma Church. Thomas may have been a doubter, but he became one of the greatest evangelists in the continent of India. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible. When I was growing up, I loved the Shroud of Turin. Remember the Shroud of Turin? It's a 14-feet piece of cloth that it depicts a crucified man that had crown of thorns on his head. And historians and scientists couldn't figure out how that could possibly be forged, because it was like the cloth was laid over and light had gone through to create the image. So the face was really distorted, but it is exactly what a face would look like if it was draped over a face and that moment of resurrection had happened. And I thought, this is awesome. I can see the Shroud of Turin. I have proof in the physical resurrection. Now, there's a small problem if you know the Shroud of Turin. It was carbon dated to the 13th century. Oops. But it hasn't stopped all the people who make pilgrimage to the Shroud of Turin. But here's my question. Let's say they had dated the Shroud of Turin to the 1st century, to the time of Jesus, to the actual death of Jesus, and it was just clear beyond a medical or scientific conclusion that that was Jesus's burial shroud. What difference would it make, really? Would we say, oh, well, now that I know and I can see and I have proof that Jesus rose from the dead, I'm going to love my neighbor? I know, now that I have proof that Jesus really rose from the dead, I will stop being such an ornery son of a gun sometimes. And I will not be angry when I drive. That will never happen. Not in LA. What difference does it make? Would it really make a difference in how we live? The truth of Jesus is not a cloth. The truth of Jesus is not that Thomas saw him with his eyes. Jesus says, have you believed because you have seen? Blessed are those who believe and have not seen. Takes us back to our story. So I get home and Mary has got this thing in the front entryway. And it really looks more like a rat than a cat. And I thought, oh, dear God, what have you trapped? And she says, I'm going to give it a bath. And I said, good. Because if there's one thing a cat loves above all others, it's getting a bath. So she starts giving this thing, this cat, a bath. And I look, and this cat is looking at her with love. And she is looking at him with love. And then in that moment, not with my physical eyes, but with the eyes of my heart enlightened, for it is only with the heart that one sees what is essential, I realized I buried the wrong cat. I don't know what cat I buried, but it wasn't Wolfie, and that has done me a world of good in my marriage. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible. And I'm going to invite you now, see if I have enough air for this, to think of a time in your life when you were able to see with the eyes of your heart enlightened, that you saw the truth of a person, of a situation, not through the mind, not through the eyes in your head, but through the eyes of your heart. And go back to that time and then lay claim to what it would be like to live in that space. Not enough water. I need a drink. This may or may not work. I usually do this at the beginning of a service. I will do this another time. I've been told by a spiritual mentor that there are two choices and possibilities in life. One is humility and the other is humiliation. I will choose humiliation because if you don't, um, humiliation is right down the road. I'll play again at another time when I have moisture in my mouth.